Okay, this is chapter 6. Uh, the topics that we cover here: sensing and perception. Now, sensing is what we take in through our five senses. Does that make sense? All right. We see, smell, touch, taste, and hear. Those are our five senses. This is how we gather information. And I'm going to focus on this, that we gather information through these five senses. Now, here's what is interesting. Even though you, myself, or another person, a group of individuals, could see, could smell, could touch, taste, or hear something, we may have a different perception. In other words, we interpret what we see. We interpret what we smell. We interpret the touch. We interpret what we taste. We don't all like the same foods. We interpret what we hear. Before we go on into this, we have a condition, and it's described in your textbook, and it's kind of an interesting condition. It's called prosopagnosia. And what makes this interesting here is that this is a face blindness. These individuals cannot recognize and remember a face. So if someone talks to them and tells them who they are and then sees them again in about 5 minutes, they don't recognize who they are because they do not remember the face. Now, this is certainly a brain anomaly. Something is taking place within the brain, and it goes back to the importance of the brain. We filter about at one time, we filter about 2,000 bits of information that reaches the brain. Now, this is filtered out through the RAS, the reticular activating system. And I think that this is interesting because it's almost like a governor on a motor that only allows a motor to run so fast. Well, the RAS filters out information that we may not need. Now, this comes along with our memory too, our sensory memory, our short-term memory, and our long-term memory. When we look around a room, there are thousands, literally thousands of aspects that we can see. When we take into effect, well, I'm looking at a piece of paper, I see a piece of paper behind the computer. That's true. There's writing on that piece of paper, but there's a distance factor. There's also color on that piece of paper. So there's just thousands and thousands of bits of information that's presented to us. But through the RAS, some of that information is filtered out, or we would just be completely overwhelmed. So this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the perception. Now, a brain review, and this concerns the limbic system. And I think that this is a good point to bring in the brain review because the limbic system is associated with pleasure. We also have neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, that is associated with, these are associated with pleasure. We have the ventral tegmental area that's associated with pleasure and also associated with opiate drugs such as heroin and morphine. We have the locus coeruleus, that's the alarm center. And this alarm center plays a role in individuals becoming addicted. The amygdala that you will see is located there, the one on the right hemisphere and one on the left hemisphere. The amygdala helps us with warning, and it looks at agreeable and disagreeable information. The hippocampus is designed to store memory, and the insular cortex plays a role in pleasure seeking. Now, the nucleus accumbens is associated with serotonin, and these again are two transmitters that really play a role in our feeling good. Looking at sight, the basis for sight and what comes into our eye is the light. We're not going to go into a lot of terms and a lot of words on these, but the outer layer is the cornea, the pupil is the opening. The iris can expand and contract. If we're in an area where there's a lot of light, it contracts. If we're in somewhat of a dark area, it will open up. Then we have rods and cones in our eyes, and we also have a blind spot. And we could go on with various parts of our eyes, but the rods and the cones, they help us distinguish between light and color. The second aspect we have is hearing, and this is from sound waves. Sound waves is air being batted back and forth, and a hertz is what is a unit of sound frequency. And the human can hear between about 20 and 20,000 hertz. Now, some sound is also measured in decibels, a baby's cry, a jet airplane taking off, a whisper, the roar of a car, or sitting inside of a car and just riding down the highway. These are all measured in decibels by how much sound they are giving off. We have the outer ear, which is called the pinna. This is the part of the ear that we can see. We have the eardrum, and this makes up the outer, middle, and inner ear, and this is also associated with balance. Taste, what we can taste is sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and savory. We have about 10,000 taste buds, and these taste buds are frequently being replaced. Smell, there's an interesting aspect with smell. Now, if you recall, the thalamus is the switching center for all incoming information, which is the exception is olfaction. Smell bypasses the thalamus and goes right to more of an emotional center. Then some individuals say that the reason for that in evolution, as we were developing into humans, whatever you want to base our origins from. But anyway, at night, when you couldn't see, it was kind of a factor that smell came in, and even though you couldn't see it, you may be able to smell it and alert us of danger. We have touch, and I visited with you about touch and the newborn infants who were in an orphanage in Europe, and how those that were touched on each end had a higher survival rate. They were touched by the caretakers, and they had a higher survival rate than those who did not receive touch in the middle of the line of orphans. About 1 square inch of screen has about 20,000 of pain, sensory receptors for pain. Now, autism, we visit a little bit about autism, and this is another perception. Autism at times, and I hope that you are acquainted with the term autism, these individuals just seem to be withdrawn socially, and they cannot relate. But they also claim that autism may be the result of mirror neurons. Now, mirror neurons are used by all to reflect the actions of another individual. As a matter of fact, some have stated that just watching an individual perform a certain act would improve the ability of the individual who was watching to perform the same act. So this goes ahead and sums us up on this section here on sensory and perception. It is the basis for cognitive psychology if and when you take the course in cognitive psychology. And again, what comes through our five senses basically is the same. But what is interesting is how the perception changes of what we see, what we taste, hear, smell, and touch. And this is quite evident because when we see a person, some individuals may be attracted to that person, where some individuals may not be attracted to that person. Again, the same sensory coming in, but the perception is different. Now we can go through the other the other four senses, and they would be pretty much the same. We see, taste, hear the same, but our perception of this is a little bit different. Now, to conclude this video, I hope that the assignments are coming in. Read the directions. If you have any questions, be sure and ask me. Remember that this course concludes on July 4th at 11 p.m. Your tests are on. Lessons will be on for most of the period. Part of the lessons will be on for the entire half. The other part of the lessons will be on for the other half. And so you can go back and review some of the videos as you wish. So until the next video, you have a good day and hope all is going well.